Chego, you just came to this country. You never passed 3 months, or in this case, 7 months. You're already collecting number of a girl.
I would, in my defense, right? Your mom was the one egging me on.
Yeah.
Said I'm running you this letter and letting you know that my brother, he go better, he done better. Oh, na 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 na. I'm running you this letter and letting you know that my sister, he go better, he done better. Oh.
This is episode 4 of the Better Informed Immigrant podcast, and today we have a special treat. I've invited one of my friends to join us, and he's going to be telling us a little bit about his immigration experience here to the US from Nigeria. He's also going to be telling us about some of the lessons he's learned academically, as well as being a professional. And he's also a family man as well, so we can even talk about that topic and what it's like being an immigrant and being married, and if there are any specific lessons we can learn from those areas. So, Segun, how are you doing today?
Doing very well. How about yourself?
I'm pretty good. I'm trying to remember, we've known each other for many years now. This was before UConn. So,
Yep.
How many years would that be, do you think?
So honestly, I can't even remember how long it's been. I know it was shortly after I came to the States, because we spoke while I was in Boston, actually, before I moved to Connecticut. So it must have been 3 months after we landed, and we got here in 2003, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it must have been somewhere summer or fall of 2003.
I don't remember that we spoke. I think I met Emoji first.
You probably did, because I stayed behind in Boston for a little bit.
The audience doesn't really know, but Emoji is your brother. So I met him first. I was so excited when I met him. That was pretty cool. And then I think that is kind of how I got to meet you as well. So you said you stayed in Boston a little bit, but let's talk about the immigration of the family and you to the US. I guess tell me a little bit from your perspective, tell me a little bit about that journey. Did you know that your parents were planning to immigrate to the US? And when did you know? And what did you do to prepare, or did you do anything? Were you just going along for the ride? Tell me about the experience.
Ours is a very boring story. So, sweet and short is my dad got a job here. He's a registered nurse, and, they filed for the entire family from Nigeria. I didn't quite know that he was getting hired, but I knew we were processing something and we were trying to travel. I took a lot of the paperwork to where it had to go and things like that. So the running around, my dad and I did those things. When he's unavailable, I would take it there. I knew we were doing something important initially. I just did not know what. Okay. And at some point, I knew we were traveling. And up until the time we went to the embassy, did all those things, got the medical checks. At that point, we all knew, there's a high possibility that we will be traveling. And the time came and we left Nigeria. We landed in Boston. We stayed with a family friend for a couple of months. And he lived in Boston, so that's why we went to Boston. And my father left before us, a couple of months before us, and he came to Connecticut and started working. And we were in Boston. After a couple of months, my parents and sister came to Connecticut. And I think my brother went to Philadelphia with one of my uncles, just go hang out with him. I stayed behind because I already picked up a job at Sears. So I was working at the Sears and Dedham Mall in Massachusetts. So, decided to stay behind a little bit, make a little bit of money. And when it was time to go to school, came to Connecticut, joined the family, and enrolled in Housatonic.
Oh, I see. So, Charlie, I want to go backwards a little bit. You said a lot today. There's some of these things I'm hearing for the first time because I never really asked you some of these questions. So, in the beginning, you said you and your dad were making the run, doing the necessary paperwork. Sometimes he's not available, he was working or had something going on, so you would have to go deliver. So, obviously, there's the actual practical process of making sure we're doing the blood test and whatever thing we need to do to fulfill the visa process to come to the US. But there's also the mindset portion I would like to ask you about, right? Before you traveled to the US, in this case, had you been previously?
No.
Have you traveled outside of Nigeria previously?
Yes, to neighboring African countries.
So neighboring African countries. So when you were imagining what the US was going to be like what was in your mind at that time when you were doing the paperwork and stuff? Or were you not thinking about it?
Movies, really. The exposure I had was like very limited to like what I'd seen in the movies, what I've heard like other people say. And I would say this. When I got to Boston, the very first night I was impressed. It was at night, there were lights everywhere, everything looked so nice. And then I stepped out the next morning and I was like, huh? It didn't quite look as good as it did the night before. You know how people talk about America. In Nigeria, they glamorize everything. Everything is like 10 times better than what it actually is. So I think like the bar was set too high that when I actually stepped out and like walked around and drove around with like my host, I don't want to say I was disappointed, but it did not quite live up to the expectation.
And the expectation was a combination of like what you had seen in like the Hollywood movies, as well as how other people glamour,
right.
put a little spin to what it is to be in the US or to the UK or places like that.
Yeah.
So I guess a couple of things there. So you guys finished the paperwork, the family moved, and you guys flew directly to Boston?
Yes.
Okay. So you flew to Boston. Let's talk about that first job, right? You said you were working at Sears.
Yes.
Like, you must have been like a real go-getter. Like, I didn't get my first job for many years. I was lucky and fortunate enough that my mom was willing to support me. But you came in like day one. You already had a job. Like, how long did it take you to get this job?
I think, was it 2 weeks or 3 weeks? I'm going to tell you. I remember specifically when we went through immigration at the airport and they stamped my passport and it said like I could work. I was in my mind, I was making dollars already. Okay. I was making dollars already, man. So I was eager to get out there and get a job. Okay. My brother and I, we walked around, looked for jobs. I don't remember specifically how we stumbled upon the CS job, but I remember just going there and they said, yeah. Like, there are openings. They showed us a room where like, they had computers in there. So we just went in there. They said, apply. We applied and the manager was available. So he just went through our application and gave us an interview. And that was the first ever job interview I have ever done in the history of life. I had never interviewed for anything before. I don't know how I did, but whatever he said, I tried to like take stuff from it and flip it back to him. A couple of days later, like got the call that I got a job, and I was excited, man. It was the best thing ever.
So 2 questions for you, right? So when I came back to the US, right, I came after secondary school, right? At that time, I had never really used a computer before. I've seen them, but never actually like used it. That was during the era of the floppy disk. You said at Sears they had a computer, which is what you used to apply. You had used computers beforehand. You'd gone to like the cyber cafes and used computers at this time.
Yes.
Okay.
So I had finished high school maybe a year, maybe 2 years before coming.
Okay.
And there was a lag between high school and starting college. I wanted to study medicine. The school that accepted me said they weren't ready for us. So they sent us back home. And they said, we're going to like build the facilities for the medical school. That whole process took like a year and a half and never really started before I left Nigeria. So during that time, I had nothing doing really. So I would just like hang out with my friends and then we'll put money together and go to like overnight browsing in the cyber cafe. That was like my exposure really. Outside of that, it wasn't like we had a personal computer or anything like that.
Okay. So you kind of did this interview. You put the Niger spin on the interview.
Absolutely.
You got the job. You got called back. And tell me about like your first day at work. So obviously your dad had a business in Nigeria. You worked for your dad in Nigeria? Did you actually work for him at all or no?
I mean, I would run errands, but I would not say that I worked for him really.
Okay, so my question to you then would be like, being a professional, right? This is your first job, getting your first job. Like, what prepared you for that experience? How did you know what to do?
I didn't.
For example, how to dress when you showed up for the first time. So what did you do? Like, tell me about that story.
That is a funny story because in my mind, I'm going to work, and going to work in Nigeria meant like, you're dressed up, all right? And you're wearing your dress pants, dress shirts, dress shoes, tucked in, or jacket if you can. So mind you, like the job was in the paint department. My responsibility was when someone comes and says, I want this color, right? I get the paints, push some buttons, and we mix the paints to get them that color. Okay. So that was my job. The first day, I was dressed like I was a banker, really. Okay. And I got there, and everybody looked at me like. Let me even tell you the story before I got to the job. Okay. So I looked outside. It was sunny. Okay. We came here in February, so it was really cold. But at that time, I didn't have like an understanding of the weather.
Okay.
So I looked aside. It's sunny, and in my mind, it cannot be that cold. So I looked at the bus schedule. I wore my, dress shirt, pants, like dress shoes, a light coat on top of it. I got to the bus stop. It was a little chilly, but it wasn't too bad because I got there right before the bus, right? I got on the bus. It took me to the terminal. And then there was like a 30-minute wait for the next bus. Oh, my God. My toes were frozen. My hands were like my ears. I was like almost crying. And like when you're standing there and like, tears are just rolling, you're not really crying, but mentally you're crying. So that was my experience getting to work. At work, everybody just looked at me like, well, why is this so dressed up? But I quickly learned I didn't have to do that. But also on the other hand, like I did not have like the proper attire anyway. So for like the first 2 weeks, I still had to dress the same, because that was all I had. And then I slowly bought like jeans and stuff like that I could wear.
Yeah, so, that's actually funny that you say that. I'm trying to think back now. It's been a number of years. But when we were growing up and we were secondary school age or whatnot, I don't think people wore jeans, right?
Jeans wear a lot of it.
Yeah, jeans was considered like, if you were like a tout or a tog, right? You're the ones that wore jeans. Everybody else, you would wear like dress clothes, especially if it was traditional, like fabric, or even if it was Western, you wear like dress clothes. But if you wore jeans at the time, you were considered somebody who was, for lack of a better word, interested in the streets kind of thing, right? That was the image that you had. So I can understand you coming here and then say, I'm going to walk, right?
Right. And, I totally did not conceptualize like what I was going there to do, and I properly dressed for that or not.
Yeah.
I absolutely was not.
How long were you at this job for?
4 to 6 months, thereabouts.
Okay, so that 4 to 6 months, right? Yeah. That's probably your exposure, right? Because at this point in time, you were not in school yet, right? So that was your exposure to the American society outside of the family members you were staying with, right? Yeah. And the family members have an understanding of Nigerian culture. So there was probably a little bit of that going on in the household. Tell me some of what you were experiencing and what your thoughts were as you were experiencing those things, like how you interacted with people, or areas where you thought maybe, that's a little odd. That's different from what I would have expected.
The biggest thing was communication. The people I worked with at the time, like, they're all like, kids, my age or a little older. We say things a little differently, right? For example, like we don't call it a dustpan. We call it a packer, right?
Yeah.
Right. So things like that. And they would just stand there and just freeze, right? Trying to like understand what I was saying or decode what I was saying. Yeah. And sometimes it could just be just regular English, but just the way I pronounced things or my accent. So that was like the first thing. But overall, I felt like, they were nice to me. They wanted to know more about like where I came from. They wanted to hang out really and just like, learn about where I was from, how are things over there, what did we do, what languages we spoke, and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I felt like it was very friendly and welcoming.
So that's interesting, right? I don't know if it's still the same now, but there are like I've certainly seen like Hollywood or TV shows about it, right? About the immigrant family that emigrates from Africa and their kids are being called like African pussy scratcher or something like that, right? And some people, that's their experience when they emigrated.
Right.
But your experience was actually a lot more friendly, a lot more welcoming, a lot more inquisitive. They wanted to kind of understand who you were as a person, where you came from. So that's pretty cool. And Boston has a reputation that some people would say, I've never really experienced it, but some people say Boston has a reputation of being racist. So I think that's pretty interesting that was not the experience for you.
Yeah. I have a story for you later on. This happened in Connecticut at a barber shop. Okay. Yeah. Remind me later. But My experience was, and I think a lot of that happens to, like, people who come here and then go to high school here.
Okay.
Yeah, high school experience for people coming in straight out of Nigeria or any other African country can be a little rough, because like these kids don't hold any punches. Like, they would just like clown you until you cry or something, or until you punch somebody. That was mostly my experience.
I see. So, all right, so you were in Boston for about 4 to 6 months, and then you decided to go to Connecticut because the family had moved to Connecticut at the time?
Right.
Okay. So 2 questions. Number one is, you decided when the family was moving to Connecticut, you decided you wanted to stay in Boston for a little bit more, right? Because you were still there for a period of time. The first question is, why did you stay? And then ultimately, why did you decide to move and join the family in Connecticut?
So the goal was always to join a family in Connecticut. At that time, my dad and I were the only ones working, and he wasn't working as a nurse just yet, because he was taking his exams and trying to get situated. So we did not have funds like that. So I had to continue working pretty much until, we got to a point where we had an apartment. Remember 360 Palisade?
Yeah, Palisade.
Yeah. Until we're able to secure that apartment and things looked a little settled. And then I moved down.
It's kind of interesting that talked about Palisade. It just occurred to me this moment, and maybe sometime we'll talk about it later. But Palisade was the starting point for a lot of Nigerian immigrant families.
Yes.
I think given the number of people that have come out of that place, we may want to get together and say, hey, let's just buy that building.
I have thought about that a lot. I have always just been like, man, it would be nice to just go back there one day and buy that place, renovate it, and make it look a lot better than it is right now. But yeah, a lot of the families that came around the same time, like Tammy and Co, we came here around the same time. We all stayed in Palisade until we were able to buy our own houses and moved out of there. So yeah, you're right. That was the starting point for a lot of Nigerian families.
Yeah, we should call it the Nigerian house or something.
Yeah. I wonder if there are other Nigerians there now.
That's a really interesting point that you bring up. I don't know. You know what? I can ask one of my sisters to go check.
Right.
Because they're in Connecticut, so I can ask them.
That would be interesting to know.
Yeah. So you said earlier that your dad got a job here. That's what was the impetus for you guys coming to the US. He got a job as a nurse, correct?
Correct.
Right. So he got a job as a nurse, but the paperwork takes time of having the Social Security and having all this thing lined up to be able to actually work as a professional. And then as a nurse, you probably also have to get the license for the nurse. So even though he had the job lined up, he couldn't necessarily take the job day one, right?
Correct.
And what you just brought up was a really important point, in the sense that you are here day one, but you may not necessarily be able to get that ideal job or even a job day one, because but you have either yourself or you have your family members that you have to care for. And they have to find a place to live, they have to eat on a daily basis, things like that. Right. So that's one of the reasons maybe that motivated you to get a job. Your dad also decided to, hey, I'm going to go get a job, right? And at that point in time, he wasn't doing a job that was nursing. He was doing a job that somebody else, especially from where we came from, would have considered less than his status. Right. So one of the things I wanted you to speak to a little bit is that whole experience of saying, hey, when you just start your journey, right, you need to do anything to make it work. And sometimes that means, for all intents and purposes, taking jobs that you otherwise would not have taken based on your past experience, but you're using it as a springboard to go to the next level that you want to get to.
Right. So there are 2 parts to that. One is, yes, do whatever necessary, get settled and get in the ideal situation. But the other part to it is also know yourself, right? If you are someone who cannot multitask, meaning you can't do that job and also work towards your goal, then you may want to find a different strategy. The worst thing I've seen is people do that secondary thing, let me do this so that I can survive while I try to do this, and then lose sight of the main goal, the main objective. Know yourself. If you're one of those, you can't do that, maybe don't. If you have that family member who is supportive, maybe stay a little longer. and be nice to them and appreciate what they're doing for you. While you try to get to where you're trying to go.
Yeah.
So I think that is the most important. Know yourself. If you do not have the resources, you don't have the support, and you have to go hustle, do it. Or maybe find a job that allows you to do what it is you want to do. For example, while we were in school, some of us worked like security, and we worked at night. So even though you're not sleeping, it allows you to still do your schoolwork, right? So maybe look for something like that allows you to still pursue what you're trying to do. But I think the most important part is know yourself.
That's a really good point that you talked about, right? So knowing yourself is really important, because if you know yourself, you can decide to make moves that you know you can actually execute, rather than making moves that you can't execute. And it would be a shame, if you would be ashamed to have this much capability, but because you're distracted by something else, to not be able to fully achieve that capability. So that's a really good point. So you moved to Connecticut. Now you're in Palisade, right? We have so many memories for Palisade. I can remember us running after each other with food and a bottle of soda. Those were the times when we guzzle like 2 liters bottle of soda.
Bruh, I don't know how we used to eat all those things, man. If I eat half of what we killed those days, Jesus, I would be 400 pounds. I don't know. We just destroyed everything in sight.
Exactly. It was domino pieces and 2 liter bottle of sodas. But okay, so you came to Connecticut. You were already done with secondary school in Nigeria, so you went to Housatonic instead. Did you know you were going to go to the community college, or were you looking at a 4-year college track? How did that work out?
So I'm going to say something, and it's not, I don't really think I was qualified, but I have an inflated sense of self. Okay. So when I was in Boston, I was talking to Harvard. Okay. And I had sent them my transcripts from Nigeria. They said, okay, they sent me some brochures and stuff like that. I was encouraged to apply, but things were just moving too fast. And I did not know anything about financial aid at that point in time. Mm-hmm. So I looked online. I saw how much it would cost to go to Harvard. And, I just started a job. My dad is doing this thing where he's not really making much money. And I just was man, there's no way this is going to happen. So I just left it alone, moved to Connecticut. And I was all right, I have to get in school, because when I got to Connecticut, the next thing really was get a job. But I was okay, I have to get in school and get going. And I think it was your mom that talked about Housatonic. And I went there, registered. As a matter of fact, I think I went there with her to register. And I remember because there was this girl that was trying to talk to me, right? And your mother was encouraging me, was egging me on, was her name is Sissy. I still remember her name. Her name is Sissy. And your mom was I think she likes you. Collect her number, things like that. And we exchanged numbers. I didn't really have a phone, but she gave me a number. And we were supposed to link up, and she stood me up eventually, and that's the end of the story. Nothing ever happened. Yeah, I remember that. So your mom was the one that actually took me to Housatonic to register.
So that's a really good point, right? A couple of things there that I want to point out a little bit. So somebody told me recently that Nigeria is the America of Africa, in the sense that we have this inflated sense of self. Mm-hmm. Right. A Nigerian, no matter where you drop in the world, whether it is he or she, just has a sense of confidence. Right. Yeah. We may not know where they say. We will just start making things happen. So I thought it was impressive, to go from that saying, okay, I just came to this country and Harvard is there. Let me go talk to them and start having a conversation about possibly going to that. So that's pretty awesome. And then the other thing I was going to say was that, but I want to talk about community colleges in general, right? So I think there are different situations here. There are certain people that are immigrants, their families are here, right? And community college is a great way to get your college career started. Mm-hmm. So if you are one of those people, it would be like an international student, right? The cost of a community college is much, much cheaper than the 4-year college. It's a good way to get the college experience started. Get some credits, start pursuing your academic field that you want to pursue, and then transfer to a 4-year college later on.
Right.
But before we go into that and dive into all of that, let's kind of dive into your Housatonic experience. So tell me about Housatonic from your perspective. Apart from this girl that you were trying to talk to. You're a married man now, so I can't tease you so much. But Segun, you just came to this country. You never have past 3 months, or in this case, 2 months. You're already collecting number of a girl.
I would, in my defense, your mom was the one egging me on.
Yeah.
I was talking to like the lady who was like helping me, and she just would not stop like interrupting us. And your mom was like, "Oh, I think she likes you. Like, I think she wants to talk to you. Go get a number. Go get a number." And I was like, "All right, sure." But yeah, my Housatonic experience, I felt like it was easy. And I am ashamed to say this, but I did not put in any effort in Housatonic. Okay. A lot of the things we did were things that, we already done in high school. For example, was it pre-calculus or was it algebra? The teacher lost her exam questions. Okay. And she thought I stole it. All right. So she would give me a different exam to everybody else. And I will score like a 94 or a 96. And then she will give me the same exam and I'll score 100. And then she would change it up and then I'll score like 98. And then she'll give me the same exam and I'll score 100. And then at the end of the semester, she called me and she was like, I lost my exam questions and I wanted to know if you came across it in any way. And I was like, no. And she said, have you noticed I've been giving you a different exam? I said, nope. I said, I just come to class, take the exam, leave. I don't talk to anybody about the exams. So I have no clue. I had no clue that you were changing my questions. And she said, I initially suspected you, but the way you answer the questions is completely different from the way I taught you guys in class. And she said, the fact that you keep getting A's, even though it's not perfect when I change the questions, tells me you know what you're doing. But I just wanted to know if you came across the questions. And I said, no, I can tell you I did not see your questions. I had no clue. This is how I learned how to do this in Nigeria. And honestly, that's just how I do it. So I never really paid attention in class. I sometimes did not even attend class. I just went to take the exam. All right. So that was how I did Housatonic mostly, because a lot of the things were things I had done previously. And, if anything, the way it was being taught to me now was a little confusing. I'd rather just stick with like what I knew coming in. We'll get to the same answer anyway. Mm-hmm. So that was how I approached Housatonic, except for chemistry and physics. Those were the classes that I had to work hard for. But apart from that, it was mostly just cruising.
So a couple of questions there. First question is, let's talk about this class, this mathematics class where the teacher thought you stole the questions. But when she finally approached you to have the conversation, were you offended in any way? Or saying, hey, how dare you accuse me of stealing these questions? Or you just didn't, it just came up, it didn't care, it didn't matter?
I wasn't, and honestly, if she had said, I'm going to draw up a new question or a new exam for you, take the exams from day one, it wouldn't matter because I knew what I was doing. I knew I had not, taken an exam or whatever. So I was not until I think I didn't know that I should be offended. Because, coming from Nigeria, right? I didn't know that I could be offended. I didn't know that I had the right to be offended. All right. So I was not offended at that time. But years later, when I replayed it, I was like, maybe I should have been a little offended. But that's just how it is when you come from a system where your teacher is the authority, and that's it. You can't question it, you can't do anything about it. You just do whatever they say and you move on.
Understood. So you were talking about chemistry and physics, and I understand what you were talking about there. I think for me, one of the challenging things for me was writing essays here compared to writing essays in Nigeria secondary school, right? Because in secondary school they will say write 400 words or whatever the amount of words is, and the goal was to get the volume, right? So you try to focus on essentially writing all these excess things to just get the number of pages you're supposed to get, right? Versus I felt that essays in English class in the US was a lot more direct, right? They were okay with you providing a one-page essay as long as it was really good, rather than providing 4 or 5 pages of fluff. And that was something that was a little bit of a challenge for me because, I was taught to put, I'm sure the teachers in Nigeria would disagree, right? But that's kind of how I treated it, right? I was taught, because you always have to meet this minimum number. So I thought the more I wrote, the better the essay. The more fluff I wrote, the better the essay is. So anyway, all right. So you did Housatonic. You told me about the academic experience. Any other unique experiences that you had in Housatonic?
Apart from the schooling part of it, we had a good time, played table tennis.
Oh yeah,
that used to be. Yeah, that was competitive. We did that. Yeah, that was it really. I was there for almost 2 years, I think.
Okay.
And it was mostly just going to school, and after school, go to work, and after work, go home, take a nap, and then do it again.
So
that was pretty much what it was.
All right. So tell me that a little bit. Well, we kind of focused on the school, but I actually forgot the fact that you were working during this period of time. Right. So what job were you doing? Why were you doing that job?
So I was working security at this time. Okay.
Why security?
Why? So that's a very interesting question. And I said that because that was not what I wanted to do. Okay. When I came back from Boston, that road on Boston Post Road, when you're going from our side of town to where Stop and Shop used to be. Is it Stop and Shop or Price Right?
Price Right.
Price Right.
So there was a Price Right, almost like that's before you get to the DMV. There was a Price Right on the left.
Yes. And you know where the U-Haul is? There's a library right there.
Okay.
Right. So I went to that library and just tried to use the computer there and just figure out what I wanted to do. What I stumbled on was billing and coding. Okay. I was going to go to some school that would prepare before the exam. It was going to take maybe 6 weeks, something like that. Okay. And I was going to pay them a couple of $100, maybe $400 or $600, something like that. I had talked about it with my dad. I had the money at that point, and I was going to do it. And one day we were in church. It was after church service, and someone just randomly asked me, there were a couple of men, grown men, sitting down and just talking. And one of them just asked me, how is your job search going? And I said, no, I'm not looking for a job yet. And, I'm trying to do this medical billing and coding thing. And one of them mockingly just said, this one doesn't want to work. Can't you see him? He's not trying to work. And I let them get in my head, and I started looking for a job. So instead of going to do the medical billing and coding thing, I started looking for a job. I looked for a job at a gas station, security job, or all that. And I finally got a job with Allied Security. Finally got a job with them. I completely ignored the medical billing and coding thing I was going to do. And that's how I started doing security.
So, what were you getting paid? How much an hour?
I think it was $11 an hour. Was it $10 or $11 an hour? Something like that.
And if you had done the medical billing and coding, how much would you have been making an hour?
Probably late teens, early 20s, I think.
What you just talked about, right, is a blessing and a curse, right? Mm-hmm. So essentially, you have this community, which we're going to talk about. We've not gotten to it yet. I want to talk about the church and how that could be a community that provides a support system. But you also have a situation where you have the blind leading the blind, right? In the sense that the guys that we're talking, obviously you didn't necessarily dive in deep with them, but they may not have known what the value of billing and coding was, right? So they just looked on the superficial, you need a job. They didn't realize, hey, if you had spent 4 weeks or 6 weeks doing this thing, 4 weeks is nothing, right? That's a month and a half. You would have been able to make almost double what you would be making if you just jumped into it, right? So So a little bit of preparation, a little bit of planning can go a long way. And I was having this conversation in one of our earlier episodes where, there are a number of things like that you could do. And instead of making minimum wage, it could put you up ahead. And every single dollar counts, especially when you go to the country. So, so that's a really good point. So,
and to be fair, I can't put that blame on them. I have to take responsibility for my actions. I could have still gone ahead with my plans, right? But I guess like there's that insecurity at that time where, I felt like, okay, you know what, maybe they're right. Maybe like, this is what you do. And I just completely lost focus of like what I was trying to do. And the irony of the entire situation was that it probably took me another 6 weeks to find a job at the minimum. So I really could have just gone to that school, got, my license, and I probably would have started work around the same time.
Okay. Because there was probably more of a demand for that, right? And less supply compared to the security job where you didn't need any training for.
Right.
Okay. So you were working nights at this time?
Yes.
Oh, man. When I talked to you guys, and I don't know that I really appreciated it then, but you were working security. A number of guys we know were working at the gas station, especially on the highway, right? Yeah. And they were all working like nights and things like that. I mean, I was at home sleeping, doing all this things. Like, I have to like take my mother for like, next time she tells me to do something or tells me to give her some money, I cannot complain because the experience is different. So you were working nights, right? And one thing I wanted to point out is this is something that's radically different than Nigeria. In Nigeria, people don't have night jobs. That's number one, right? There is no, unless you're working in the hospital, right? You typically don't have.
Unless you're working in the hospital or you're working in the factories, you don't have night jobs like that.
You don't have night jobs. Well, number two is that if you're in school, which I think the experience is probably different now because things are tough, right? But generally, if you're in school, you're not necessarily working, right? You don't have expectations to finish. But here, like you were in school hustling to get your degree, but at the same time, you had to say, hey, let's work. The family needs financial resources. And this is not just money for yourself. This is money for the family because you're contributing to the family pot to make sure that the whole family was okay. So that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah. And I would say this, at the point where like my dad started his like nursing job, it wasn't so much like family money anymore. It became like, my own money. But I had already started working. Like, I had a taste for money already. So I wasn't going to stop working.
He enjoyed the money. He couldn't stop.
I wasn't going to stop working.
Like German, what did they so, we're laughing about it now, but I could remember during that time, people used to be very proud of having like second and third jobs.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like the older generation at the church, you know what I mean? It's kind of interesting, right?
Yeah. If you did not have a job, you were just looked at as like you're lazy or, you don't want to work or whatever they want to say at that point, Yeah. So like, I did the security job. I get there, let things settle down a little bit. Yeah, it wasn't so much like of a stressful job, really. I sat behind a computer just watching screens. So I just bring my books out, do my assignments. And the next morning I go home, I nap until like, I have to go to class and then do it again.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So you go to Susutonic. Did you get your degree at Susutonic or did you transfer before getting your degree?
I transferred out.
You transferred out. And we went to UConn, right? Because you and I were in Susutonic together, but we also were in UConn together. We were actually roommates at one point in time. So tell me about, I guess, a couple of things was, what was your experience transferring from community college to UConn? And what were some of your experiences and the UConn part that you thought were interesting from, being an immigrant perspective and some of the experiences that you were having today?
So UConn was very different for me. I went from Susutonic to a class of like 200 people. I couldn't really get FaceTime with my professors. Anytime I tried to get help, one professor said to me, was like, are you trying to beg for marks or something like that? I just needed help. I did not understand the material and I was just trying to get help. So UConn was like difficult for me, like adjusting to the campus, to the people, to the system. did not come at once. It didn't come easy. It took a couple of semesters. Yeah, so UConn was a struggle initially. Towards the end, things got a little better. But if I were to do it again, I probably would have gone to a smaller school. In hindsight, I probably would have. Yeah, that was really my experience from UConn. Met a lot of good people, met a lot of people, made a lot of friends. But academically, I felt that it was challenging and I felt that I couldn't really get the help that I needed.
I understand what you mean. Like, it was Sonic, because it was a smaller school, the support systems were in place, right?
Yeah.
And when we talk about support system, we're not necessarily talking about, hey, they're doing the work for us or anything like that. We're just saying, when you needed help, you knew which person to go talk to.
Right.
To say, hey, I need a tutor. Could somebody tutor me on this or whatnot? UConn was a much bigger school, right? In some cases, you were in a class where there were 100 people, 100 plus people, right? And some of us, we don't learn in that same way compared to others, right? Other people can just listen and absorb the stuff. Some people, they need a little bit of more interaction and dynamism, be able to kind of absorb the material a little bit. So I can understand what you're talking about. And at some point, sometimes it almost felt as if you were just a number, right? You were not like a student.
And honestly, I felt like a lot of the professors were just interested in doing their research. They weren't really interested in the students or in your development or anything like that. Yeah. They just want to come to class, say what they have to say, and go back in their lab. And anything after that is an inconvenience to them.
Yeah, so that's a good point that you brought up, right? Yeah. Because one of the things people don't understand in the US is that there are different types of universities. So there are some universities that I would say what they do is primarily teach. There are some universities that they're really more like research organizations, right? And part of the professor being able to do that research is they have the responsibility of also teaching. Some of them would farm it up to that, like their teachers. Right? Some of them will just do the bare minimum, right? So I see your point there.
And I say that, people thrive, Yeah. I just was not one of them. People did well. I just struggled during that time.
When you were at Pusatonic or where you were at UConn, actually, at UConn, what were you studying? What was your degree?
Biology.
I didn't say this in the beginning, but you're a medical doctor now, right? Did you know then that you wanted to be going to medicine? Is that why you studied biology?
Yeah.
Okay. So you knew you wanted to go into medicine. So you studied biology. You talked about the challenges you were having at UConn. One of the things that somebody would do in some cases would say, hey, you know what, if I'm having challenges, studying biology at UConn, maybe medicine is not for me. And maybe I should change direction. So I guess my question to you is, what did the UConn experience make you think about medicine in general? And how do you continue to persevere to actually go through and become a medical doctor?
I would start by saying my goal was to become a medical doctor, but above everything, my first priority was to put myself in a position where I'm able to provide for my family. I chose medicine as a vehicle to get there, but ultimately, that was priority. Priority was be able to provide for your family. Growing up, there were times where things were just really tough, right?
When you say tough, in the US or you mean in Nigeria?
In Nigeria, okay. Where just food was a challenge, right? Getting food was challenging. You did not really know where the next meal was coming from. We had that period, and I was old enough. I was old enough to recognize what was going on and to form that mindset that I need to be able to provide for my family, right? So to me, that was the most important thing. I chose medicine as a way to get there. While I was at UConn, I still felt strongly that I wanted to do medicine. However, if medicine was not going to work, I had to find an alternative. Okay. So when I finished at UConn, I didn't feel like I was a strong enough applicant to medical school. So I applied to a few schools. Of course, I didn't get in. So I just worked. After...
You worked as what?
So at this point, I worked in a group home.
Okay.
I worked in a group home. And
get an EMT license at one point?
Yes, I did. I forgot about
because
that.
I remember there was a time when we were working at the gym and we had to actually take care of somebody. This was at the gym you can. Well, continue the story. I interrupted you. Continue the story about the group home stuff, but I want you to go back and talk to me about why you decided to become an AMT and all that kind of jazz.
So it's a part of the story, so I'll just talk about it now. That part was like, me trying to position myself to be a better applicant for medical school, really.
Okay.
I thought if I, get a EMT license, I would have more experience that would look better on resume or my application. So that was why I did that. And I volunteered company in Shelton. Yeah, I volunteered with them for a couple of months before I stopped going there. Yeah, but when I graduated, I took that job, did that job for a year and a half, maybe two. And one particular incident happened. I was at work, and this was how I decided to apply to medical school. Okay. I was at work, and there was a colleague of mine who, if you have a 30-minute conversation with him, he would tell you how he wants to start a strip club. So I was working with two people. Both of them were talking, okay, a guy and a lady. The lady tells the guy, who always talks about owning a strip club, the lady tells the guy, why don't you go back to school? Even if you want to, be a businessman, you want to open a strip club, getting a degree in business will help you. And I was doing something completely different, but I could hear the conversation. And the girl turns to me and says, just like he's going to school, and one of my other colleagues, he was still in school then, like just as they're going to school, you can go to school too and get a degree. It will help you in what you're trying to do. And she says to me, like, what do you think? Don't you think so? And all I said was, yeah, education cannot hurt. And I just moved up. He got so upset. He didn't say anything to me, but later on I heard that he was telling everyone he was going to get me fired. So when word got back to me, I wasn't really angry. It was just a moment for me to reflect. So I sat there and I was like, okay, this is not what I wanted to do. Medicine was always the goal, and I think I'm losing sight of it. So I'm talking a couple of days later, I applied to American schools. I applied to Caribbean schools. 2 weeks later, I got an interview for a Caribbean school. 2 months later, I was going to the Caribbean.
Oh, I didn't know it was that fast.
Yeah.
So, all right. So now we're going into the medical act, and we need to clarify a few things for folks.
Yeah.
So, a couple of things. I think, I was listening to a video clip by Miles Monroe, and he was talking about, he was talking about how society, Miles Monroe, he's a minister that was from the Bahamas. I think he's late now. He's
right. In a plane crash or something like that?
Yeah, it was a plane crash.
Yeah.
He has such wonderful messages, and the way he breaks down the concepts are really fascinating to me. So I listened to a few of his things. But one of the things he was talking about in the video I listened to was, hey, some of you or some of us, right, we subscribe to what the world has said about you, right? So they give you a test. Maybe you were just having a bad day. Maybe you didn't sleep that night. You do that test, you do poorly for whatever reason, and they say, oh, you are dumb. You can never do this. You can never do that, right? And before we know it, we start to buy into that message. We start agreeing with the limits that have been placed on us, which is based on one test at one time that maybe you were not adequately prepared for, or something happened that made you not necessarily do as well. You could just be a bad test taker, right? You could be absolutely fantastic. You could just be a bad test taker. And it's kind of interesting, right? So you went from this situation of you wanted to do medicine, you went from UConn. It wasn't necessarily the best environment for you academically, but you still finished, you graduated there, you applied to a few schools, maybe you got a little discouraged. So you said, hey, let me go work for a while. You worked for a year and a half. And if you didn't have this conversation or this scenario happened that you just described, you wouldn't have gone back to say, hey, let me go pursue that dream. And looking back at it now, you're done. Like it was many years thinking, right? It wasn't like 2 or 3, but like you are actually a medical doctor today practicing. Right. So that's pretty impressive. Like, let's not take that for granted. But as somebody who's not into medicine, I don't know anything at all. Tell me a little bit about what you mean by American school and Caribbean school. Like, how does that whole thing work?
Right. So the ideal scenario is that you go to school in America if you're American, right? But there's something called American international schools. So this is schools in the Caribbean. Most of them are in the Caribbean, set up by Americans for Americans. Sometimes the criteria to get in is not as deep as the American schools. So you go there, you go do your clinical sciences, and then you come back to the States and do your political sciences. I mean, when you go there, you go for basic sciences, not clinical sciences. You go there, you go to your basic sciences. So that's just book work. And then you come back to the States and then you do your clinical rotations with different hospitals. So when I applied to both Caribbean and American schools. But the Caribbean school got back to me a lot faster, right? So I didn't even get a chance to hear back from the American schools. While I was there, I think I had already finished my first semester. I got an interview from a school here, but I was just like, I was already there. I'm not going to stop what I was doing and then come back for that interview. I may not even get in. Who knows? Whatever. So I just decided I was just going to focus on what I was doing there and just finish the mission. So
is the cost different or is it the same?
Oh, significantly different.
Like more expensive or less expensive?
Oh, less expensive. Okay. I'm going to revise that statement. There are some Caribbean schools that are actually more expensive than American schools. So if you go to the top 4 Caribbean schools, it's more expensive. I think at this moment in time, if you go to Ross, you're probably paying 100 G's a year. Most American schools are probably 50, 60 G's a year. I'm going to look that up as we're talking. I don't want to put in wrong information. But in my case, it was cheaper, significantly cheaper. So I did not have any reservation about going. The only thing I did was I tried to find people who graduated from the school and practicing. I saw a few, okay? And here comes the inflated sense of self again. And I was like, if the people graduated from that school, they're practicing, there's nothing stopping me from graduating from here and practicing. So I was like, all right, let's do it.
All right. That's pretty cool. So, and you moved so quickly, submitted the application, they called you back. And I think you said within 2.5 months period or so, you flew to the Caribbean and you started classes over there. So that's pretty interesting. So where in the Caribbean were you? And I do recall when you were flying out, but tell me about the experience living in the Caribbean. How was that like?
It was fantastic. I can't say anything different. It was different. It's a hybrid between Nigeria and here. Okay. You have all the amenities that you have here, but it's not as developed as here. Okay. So some parts of it looks like Nigeria. Some parts of it, more American. But overall, you have all the basic amenities. And I was in Bonaire. Bonaire is right beside Curacao. If you hear the ABC island, so that's Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao. So I was in Bonaire. The weather was beautiful. You go to school, come back from school, go for a run by the water. It was just beautiful.
Wow. That's interesting. I never came to, you know what, maybe in retrospect, I should have come by to visit because I missed out on the opportunity to.
Yeah.
I've never been.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. I went island hopping once. So I saw Curacao, I saw Aruba. I still will go back to go visit. That's how much I liked it.
Okay. So you go there and you were doing your basic sciences, you said?
Correct.
Right. So you were in the Caribbean for how many years?
A year and a half.
A year and a half? And then what happened next?
Then you come to America, study for the first part of your board exam. It's called USMLE.
USMLE?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's United States Medical Licensing Exam.
Okay.
Yeah. So study for the first part of that exam. Once you pass that, then you go into your clinical rotations.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you came back, did you come back to Connecticut or is that when you moved to Atlanta?
So I actually went to Illinois to go study for step 1.
Okay.
So after I finished, then I came to Georgia for my clinical rotations.
Okay. And for the clinical rotation, because I don't know anything about this, explain how that works. Do you have to apply to different places to be able to do that, or does the school assign you to a place?
Right. So the school typically will have relationships with physicians that work in hospital systems.
Okay.
Or have a relationship with that hospital system itself.
Okay.
For example, for internal medicine, I was attached to a doctor, went to his office for 3 months. And he also rotates through, it used to be Atlanta Medical Center, but it's now WellStar. He rotates, he sees patients in the hospital. So I will go and round with him in the hospital. He would teach us stuff. We'll see patients for him and things like that. Very similar to what the American students do. It's just that it may not be in one spot. So you may do your internal medicine at Wellstar, but go do your family medicine at Emory and go do your OBGYN at Northside Hospital. So you may just have to go to different places, but you're attached to a physician who is licensed and you're getting quality education most of the time.
Okay. So the difference between this system and what the quote unquote American student would have gotten would be if they would do the same thing, but maybe they would do it in one hospital rather than going from one hospital to another. Okay.
Yeah.
So you did that for how many years?
That was for 2 years.
For 2 years, and then what's next?
Yeah. Then applying to residency. So while within those 2 years, you take the second part of your licensing exam. Okay. That's the USMLE Step 2. When I was taking it, there were two versions of it. One was where you go to like a prometric center, the exams are usually like 8 hours. You do the exam and then you get your score back. The second part of it is where you go, it's called clinical skills. You go to a center somewhere in Georgia or Illinois or Philly or something like that. And you go see patients. There are paid actors that act like the patients. They act out a scenario. You attend to them, and then you write your notes, and then like a panel grades you and pass you or fail you. Okay. So you do that within the 2 years that you're doing your clinical rotations. And once you're done with your rotations, or during the last year of your rotation, you apply to residency.
Okay. Yeah. So, and the application to residency is, and no matter what school system you have to do that. You have to apply for residency somewhere.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So, do you feel that the Caribbean school versus the American school, there is an advantage for residency, or does it not matter?
Oh, it matters. There's an advantage, absolutely. An American student will almost always get a spot before you. Okay. Everything being equal, they will almost always get a spot before you. And even if you score better than them, there's still a higher likelihood that they will look at them before they look at you. And I can understand that. It is an American school, right? And it's an American residency. They have a responsibility to their own students, right? So we cannot deny that responsibility that they have to American grads. So I understand that. If you want to go to a competitive specialty, it's more difficult coming from a Caribbean medical school, just because American students will get looked at before you, more than likely. And if it's competitive, that means a lot of people want to do it, and the people that want to do it do really well on their exams, right? And do really well in school. So the chances that you will get it is not as good as if you're an American student.
Is there anything that one could do to make yourself more appealing if you were a Caribbean student?
Score really high in your exams.
So those exams are really key.
Yep.
Okay. So you would need to focus really hard on those exams to make sure that you get a higher score. Okay.
Yep. You got to kill it.
And it's been a while now, but I know these exams that we're talking about are not like, if I remember you were studying for multiple months before this exam. These are not like, So, but anybody that's into medical school has an understanding that they're going to do this exam at some point, and there's a preparation to go into that. Okay. You applied for a residency, and then you got accepted in Mississippi?
Right. So it's a matching system. And what that means is that you apply to residency spots. They call you for an interview, you interview, and at the end of the interview season, you make a list of your preferences, right? You rank a program at number 1. Let's say you have 5 interviews, okay? You rank your highest program, your preference at number 1, and the least at number 5, because you got 5 interviews. Now, the programs also will rank the candidates that they interviewed, right? So if you rank them highly and they rank you high enough, you match, and then that's the program you go to. It is non-negotiable. You can't change it. That's where you go.
And how long does residency take?
It depends on your specialty. It could be 3 years, it could be 4 years, it could be 7 years, could be 8 years.
Wait.
7 years. Yeah.
It could be 3 to 7 years?
Yeah, it could be 3 to 7 years.
Wow. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. So if you're doing family medicine or pediatrics or internal medicine, then it's 3 years, right?
Okay.
If you're doing like anesthesiology, then it's 4 years. ER used to be 4 years, but it's 3 years now. If you're doing neurosurgery, for example, then it's 7 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, in your case was a kind of unique situation, right? Because you were in Atlanta, right? For the what did you call it? Not basic sciences, the other sciences. What is it called?
Clinical sciences or clinical rotations.
Clinical rotations. Yeah. Atlanta and clinical rotations. That you got married during that time, right?
Right.
And then now you had to go to Mississippi, but your family base was in Atlanta, so there was a little bit of juggling back and forth between Mississippi and Atlanta for the family for a while. So that kind of had a dynamic to play, but you also knew you were moving forward in this medical direction. I guess.
Exactly.
So you were in Mississippi for how many years?
4.5 years.
4.5 years. Yes. And what is your specialty? You've told me this before, but I forgot it.
So my primary specialty is in family medicine.
Okay.
And my secondary specialty is in interventional pain. Interventional pain.
Interventional pain. I was going to say international pain. Oh, like international pain. It was Nigeria pain that came to America.
It's a very painful process, man.
So, all right. So, now, so when you were done with your residency, what was the next step for you?
So remember how I was telling you earlier that my main goal or my priority was being able to provide for my family, right?
Yes.
So I applied to residency a little later because I didn't take one of my exams in time. Okay. So there was a lag between medical school and residency.
Okay.
So typically I would have applied the prior year, but I didn't. So before I applied, I picked up a job in clinical research.
Okay.
Because I was essentially done with medical school. I had one rotation left, and I was just going to wait and not take that rotation until, the year I was applying to residency, because I wanted my year of graduation to match the year I was applying to residency, because that matters. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So I picked up a job, and the goal was, even though I had done my exams, my best foot is forward already, but I have to find a backup, right? If I apply to residency and for some reason I do not get residency, then I have to have something that I'm doing. Mm-hmm. So I got a job in clinical research. I was doing that until the day that I got the email saying I matched. So then I moved to Mississippi. My family was still here in Georgia, but then it became a little too difficult to manage two households really. So they moved and joined me in Mississippi, and then when I finished, we moved back to Georgia.
Okay. So when you finished, did you already have a job lined up before moving back to Atlanta? Mm-hmm. And what was that what is an application process like for a medical doctor? I don't. Do you apply just like a regular job? Like, do you go to hospital website and you just start applying? Like, or is it different?
No, it's a little different. So I finished residency, and while I was in residency, I knew I was going to apply to a paying fellowship. I took the off-cycle position. So what that means is a regular position is from July to June. But the position I took was from January to December. Okay. So I graduated residency in July. So I have that gap in between. So I stayed on at my program as faculty for that 6 months. They were kind enough to let me do that because it's an expensive process for them. But because I guess they liked me enough to accommodate me. So I did that until I started fellowship. Then halfway through fellowship, I started looking for a job in Georgia. I saw this job. I sent him an email saying, hey, I am interested in your position. In this position that you have available. And someone reached out to me on the phone and connected me with the owner of the practice. And we spoke, and they flew me into Georgia a couple of weeks later on for an interview. And they sent me a contract, I think maybe 2 days after. And then negotiation took like another month or thereabout.
Okay. So a couple of questions for you, and I'm going to bring up some of the conversations that we've had offline a little bit. Like, one of the things you talked about was, hey, because at this point we've talked about like essentially your medical training. But one of the things you talked about was you thought there were some mistakes that people make when they're going through their medical training that you feel they should consider doing something different instead. That was number one. And then number two is you talked about this concept of, I'm going to say it wrong, but kind of like life specialty, right? There are certain specialties within medicine that are very demanding, right? And there are some of them that are more conducive to having a family environment. Could you talk about those two concepts and maybe more about some lessons you learned based on your experience?
Yeah, that comes about a lot when I talk to people trying to go to med school, applying to medical school. There is this thing that people do. They feel like their application has to be perfect. So they take a gap year, they take 2 gap years, try to make this application perfect. Your application does not have to be perfect. All right. You only need to get into 1 school. Okay. You're not going to go to 2 schools or 3 schools. Okay. Apply widely. Go to the school that accepts you. All right. Because what you don't realize is time is money. We always say time is on your side because you're young, but time is never on your side. Time stops for nobody. Okay. It doesn't matter how young you are. Time doesn't stop. Right. So looking back at my experience, I would have gone to the Caribbean 2 years before I did.
Because you went at the group home for a while.
Yeah. Because if you look at the opportunity cost, right? If you look at those 2 years, right? I was probably making maybe 40 a year, 50 a year at best. I don't even think I was making up to 50 a year. But if you look at that, compare that to 2 years of income as a physician, right? You're in serious deficit. You always think time is on your side, you're young and all that stuff. Yes, you're young, but if you look at that time in terms of how much money you're leaving on the table and how much sooner you could get things done, don't wait for that gap year. Apply. Plan to take that gap year still if you don't get in. But if you apply widely enough, a lot of people will be surprised by the outcome of that. So that's what I tell people all the time. Don't wait until your application is perfect. One thing you have to make sure is, do I have the minimum requirements to get into these schools? If you do, put your application in. Plan to take that gap year still, but your application has to go in and give yourself a chance to get into school. If you don't get in, take that gap year, enhance your application as much as you want to or as much as you need to. But you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't put an application in. And if you remember earlier, when I said initially I applied to like a handful of schools, before I started, my 2-year journey at a group home, right? You have to apply widely. Apply to as many schools as you can apply to. For a lot of people, really, it shouldn't matter if you went to school in Mississippi or you went to school in New York or you went to school in Texas. Who cares? It's an accredited medical school, unless like you're trying to do neurosurgery and you want to be Harvard trained. Yeah, okay, I guess so. But otherwise, if you don't need to meet those kind of specific requirements, give yourself a chance. Apply.
Were you aware of the Caribbean schools when you finished at UConn?
No.
So, okay. So you did. So when did you become aware of them as an option?
I think somewhere in maybe year one after you come.
Okay. And how did you come to know about it? Was it just a Google search or somebody told you about it?
I do not remember. It may have been a search, and then I heard of some people who had gone to the Caribbean, and the stories I heard were mixed. Some people went to the Caribbean. It was difficult to integrate back to the American system. And some people went to the Caribbean and were able to get back in. It just took a little longer. So those were the stories I heard.
Mm. So based on that line of thought, did you feel that you had any challenges integrating back into the American system?
Not particularly. I would say the particular school that I went to did not really prepare you for your steps. Okay. So that meant that you had to come back to the States, take one of those courses like Kaplan or PASS program. And that's what I was doing in Illinois, and prepare for the steps yourself.
Okay.
Right. So because you don't have the resources, your school doesn't provide you the resources to do that. So you have to you have to be a self-starter if you're going to go to a Caribbean school. Because a lot of things is just going to be on you. You're just paying them to have the opportunity to do X, Y, Z. You have to make sure you go do X, Y, Z and make it work for you.
Let's talk about the other question I asked, and then I would have one more I want to ask you, but I don't want to distract you yet. So the other topic was really about, what did you call it? Was it life specialties or?
Oh, yeah. Lifestyle specialty.
Lifestyle specialties.
All right.
So talk about the concept and explain what the concept is and what should people be considering if they are interested in having a good family life as a physician.
So lifestyle specialties really just means you're away from the hustle and bustle of the hospital, really. The typical image of a doctor is someone who is in the hospital rounding multiple hours, who is on call all the time. Your pager is beeping up. That's the typical image of a doctor. Lifestyle specialties don't really do all of that stuff. Okay. They're mostly outpatients. They're mostly 8 to 5, don't work weekends, don't really take calls. If they do, it's maybe a week in a year or a month in 2 years or something like that. So you have very specific hours, or you work in the hospital, but your schedule is flexible. You work for 2 weeks and you're off for 2 weeks, or you're on for 1 week, you're off for 1 week. So these are the lifestyle specialties. The popular ones are dermatology, because it's mostly outpatients. You really have emergencies. Ophthalmology, same deal. There are true ophthalmologic emergencies, but it rarely happens. And when it does, they take care of it in the ER mostly. And if your service covers the hospital, you may get called every now and again, but it is not that bad. There is radiology. Psychiatry now is a lifestyle specialty. There is interventional pain, what I'm doing right now. It's a lifestyle specialty as well. Some people say anesthesiology is, just because if you want to work 3 months in a year, you can work 3 months in a year and have the rest of the year off. You're just going to have to work really hard for that 3 months. So yeah, there's a lifestyle specialty.
So based on your experiences with your medical training, what lessons learned would you give somebody who is an immigrant, an African immigrant particularly, right? Maybe some of them are coming in as a teenager going through the system, or maybe even some of them are nurses or medical doctors in their host country or their original country, and they come in here. And I think some of those things don't necessarily transfer over. What advice or would you give them for how to get started and get what they need to do so that they can actually start practicing as a nurse, doctor, or healthcare individual?
Well, the first thing is know what you need to do for your specific circumstance. So if you're coming from Nigeria as a nurse, you need to get ECFMG certified. I think that's to do ECFMG as well, not just doctors. It needs to be ECFMG certified. ECFMG is an organization that takes your degree and pretty much translates it to an American degree. Okay, so you need to get that. And once you get that, then you're eligible to sit for your licensure or your licensing exam. You get that done, and then you can get a job. As a physician, it's a little different. You have to sit for your licensing exams. And remember, I was talking about step 1, step 2 earlier. So you have to sit for step 1, step 2, and step 3. Step 3 is not absolutely necessary, but it's preferred that you do it. And after that, apply to residency, okay? Because you have to get trained in the American system. And after residency, then you can practice independently.
Okay, great thing that you just brought up. What is this thing called? UCFMD?
You mean the organization that translates your degree?
Yes.
So it's ECFMG.
I'm sorry. I'm going to have you repeat that one more time.
Yeah.
Right. ECFMG?
Yeah.
And do you know what the name is?
I'm going to have to look at that real quick.
I'm going to have to do some research about that organization. And this organization is not just for medical doctors, right?
I think nurses use it too. It's Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates.
Okay, so this is for the people in the healthcare field. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then you said they have to go do residency, right? So I guess one question for you is that if you are doing your residency, you do get paid a stipend or you get paid a little bit, right? It's not free. You're not paying them.
No. You get paid anywhere from 50s to 60s a year.
Okay, so
from 50-something to 60-something to early 60s a year, depending on the location.
It's enough. If you have a family, it may be enough, but you may need your partner to kick in a little bit. Okay, makes sense. All right. So that's kind of been the career so far, as far as medical training. Let's go back and talk about a few things that are kind of focused on experiences as an immigrant. And before we do that, you told me to remind you of a story that you wanted to tell related to the barbershop. Tell me a little bit about that story, and then I'll ask you some other questions.
So, you remember that U-Haul I was talking to you about on Boston Post Road?
Yes.
There's a barbershop right beside it.
Okay. And
my brother and I, we go to that barbershop to get our cuts or whatever. And that day, I got there before my brother. We don't dress like them. We're very relaxed in our dressings. Often we just wear flip-flop and just pants and a regular shirt. So I walked in and they were just going in on us, right? And they were just this Africans, they come here and they look so dirty, wear flip-flop and shorts, all dusty and stuff. And you just see them in 2 or 3 years, they've bought a house, they've bought a car, and they're doing well. They just talked down about how we dress so badly. And then my brother walks into the barbershop and meets exactly what they just talked about. And I swear, everybody stopped for a second and everybody just died laughing. And he stood there confused for a few seconds and then walked out.
He was wearing flip-flops, wasn't he?
Yeah. He was the perfect example of everything they just talked about. And he walked in, and I swear to God, I couldn't help it. So I laughed. It was too funny not to laugh. I felt bad for him because you could see the confusion in his face. He was stunned. He just stood there and was everybody literally stopped. You could hear a pin drop. And a few seconds later, everybody just died laughing. And he just stood there for a few seconds and just turned around and walked out.
It's because to kind of clarify a few things for the audience, right? So when you were saying they here were pretty much African Americans, right? Having a conversation about Africans that immigrate. And in Nigeria specifically, it was normal outfits to wear flip-flops. Because in America specifically, people don't usually wear flip-flops unless they are at home or they're on the beach, right? I've never seen people wear flip-flops to the grocery store or place like that. Versus in Nigeria, that's what you did. That was your sandals, quote unquote, right? You had the sandals or something like that. Maybe because the weather is also different, right? It's warmer, so you tend to wear that kind of outfit more. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. I understand. I thought that was pretty funny. But you betrayed your brother. You didn't say that's my brother.
I'm sorry, man. It was too funny. I felt bad for him, but in the moment I laughed. It was just too funny. Honestly, it felt like they saw him coming and they were talking about him. That was exactly what it felt like, because he was the exact image of everything they just said.
That's so funny.
It was crazy. It was crazy.
So it go back to, like, in every in comedy, there's always an element of truth, right? And some of that truth could be a lot or little, depending on what it is. So So you emigrated from Nigeria, I think you said in 2003. Have you gone back since then? It's 2024 now, so it's about 21 years.
I haven't been in like 15 years. So I would just put that out there. So I think I've been once or twice. When Palumi got married, I went to Nigeria because I was.
Did he get married in Nigeria?
Yeah.
Okay.
He got married in Nigeria. Yeah, okay. But I haven't been in Nigeria since then.
Okay. Like, what are some of the things you miss about Nigeria?
I'm a foodie. I miss the food.
Which food?
Oh my God, everything. Everything tasted different when I went home.
You like F4? I know you like F4. You were the one that F4 yeah.
The vegetables tasted different. It tasted so good. The fish tasted different. Everything just tasted so good. There was a restaurant that my brother and I went to when we went to visit one of our family friends. I kid you not. I was at the airport and I was like, man, I would do anything to go back. If I wouldn't miss my flight, I was considering just going back real quick and just getting something to go. It was that good. The food, I absolutely miss the food. I miss the vibes. I feel like there's just a Nigerian vibe that we've kind of replicated it here, but it's still not the same. I miss Christmas in Nigeria. Christmas growing up was the thing. That's like the holiday, really, the major holiday in Nigeria. I miss that. I just miss having the relationships that I had with people in Nigeria back then, like my friends from high school. We're obviously not as close as we used to be. We talk every now and again, but I miss those days.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, compared to Nigeria, what are some of the things that you enjoy in your new country? The new country being the US in this instance.
It just works.
What did you say?
I said it just works.
You thought of the language it works. You thought of the water it works.
Yeah.
That should be the slogan for America or the West in general. It just works.
It just works. What else can I say? You know how people say the grass is not always greener on the other side?
Yeah.
The grass is greener where you water it, where you water the ground. I feel like there's some grounds, even if you bring the ocean to it, the grass will still not be green. That's how I feel about Nigeria. I feel like, I don't know, man. I feel like I have given up on Nigeria as a country. I enjoy, obviously just the basic amenities here. And I think that's why a lot of people succeed when they come to America, especially from countries like Nigeria. There's something about working and actually getting results. Okay? So that means I can actually just go to work, put in my 40 hours and get paid at the end of the week, right? There's nothing like, oh, your salary is not ready. You got to wait for the next 3 months. You get what I mean? I can actually just go to school and graduate in 4 years. There's nothing like, we're on strike, so a 4-year education is going to take me 6 years, right? So things like that, that is what you really enjoy when you come to a Western country. Because you've taken out all the nuisance, right, that we face just to get basic things done. And now if you just apply yourself and you see results, you're motivated to do more. Because, I can go to school, get my grades, and just move on. Why won't I, right? I can work and get my salary at the end of the week or at the end of the month. Why wouldn't I work, right? So it's a shift or a difference from it's different from, I will speak for myself, what I was used to in Nigeria. Because there was a time when my father worked at a government hospital where he didn't get paid for months. Right? When we came here, you work every 2 weeks, you get your paycheck. No questions asked. You don't have to go talk to somebody. You don't have to go do anything extra. It just comes to your bank account.
Exactly.
Right. So that is the difference. It just works.
That's fantastic. When you said it the first time, it just worked. Like, what is that? But when you elaborate, it kind of makes sense. Like, things work. the process the process works. You don't have to think about it. It just works.
Yep.
You've been here for like 2 decades now. Like, would you feel that the whole immigration process or you emigrating has affected your sense of identity?
Somewhat.
Is that like I used to say? It's like, is that like a first world problem? But we don't have time to think about that one.
And honestly, I did not think so until when I was in residency. Okay? In residency, they put you on the hospital's website, right? And my program wanted to know where your hometown is. And I got confused. I was like, is my hometown Lagos? Is my hometown Bridgeport? Or is my hometown Georgia?
I see.
So who am I claiming here? All right. And I think initially I said Lagos. And then at my fellowship, I think I said Bridgeport. So, that's the crisis right there. Do I still identify as like that kid from Nigeria? Or am I going to adopt where I'm at right now and say, hey, hometown now is Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia, or whatever. So in that sense, yes. But when it comes down to it, I am as Nigerian as it gets. People still look at me and be like, you sound different. Where you from? All right. It's in that sense, yes. Like, I feel like my sense of identity is a little interesting, to say the least.
I see. Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. So next question is about, like, how has your relationship changed with family and friends back in Nigeria since you emigrated? Like, how was it in the beginning, in like the first year or two, and how is it now that's 20 years plus?
Some friends I don't talk to at all anymore. Some friends I talk to every now and again. Initially, I talked to everybody a lot, right? But then I quickly realized that they don't have an understanding of how the American system works. And they don't have an understanding of the currency also. So, in Nigeria, everything is in thousands, right? You get paid a couple of thousands, every month. So a lot of them thought you're getting paid in thousands over here as well. They don't know we're working with like a minimum wage type situation, right? Some of them will be like, hey, send me Timberland boots or whatever. It's only $150. Not understanding $150 is a lot of money, right? That is more than a day's work.
Yep. If you're working at $11 an hour, that's more than a day's work.
Right, that is more than a day's work.
And this is before you will take out the taxes.
Exactly. A lot of them did not have that understanding. And after a while, someone just keeps asking you for stuff that I can't even afford for myself, right? It starts to put a strain on the relationship. And gradually we just kind of drifted. But I have friends from high school I still talk to every now and again, family members. I feel like most people were understanding. A lot of people knew we just left the country to a different place. It would take us time to settle. And the financial demands didn't come to me, if there were any, right? Probably to my parents, right? So I didn't feel that kind of burden from them. So I have really good relationships with my family, especially from my mother's side. Yeah.
Okay. So, how did you stay connected? I think Facebook before it was MySpace and then Facebook came out, we were in college. I think it was when we were in college that Facebook came out.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So that's been a wonderful tool for keeping connected, WhatsApp and all this kind of thing. Keeping connected with friends and stuff like that. I know you were into the Facebook era. I remember that from our days.
Yeah.
No, that was pretty cool. But so a slightly different question along the same lines. So, like, do you feel that you've stayed connected to your culture of origin? In this case, you are Yoruba. Like, do you feel as if you're still connected to the Yoruba culture in the true sense of the word? And if so, how are you doing that? What challenges are you facing from that aspect of things?
I would say that I'm still connected. I don't know that I'm as connected as I was in the beginning. But if I were to put a percentage on it, I will say probably I'm still like 80% connected. You're here interacting with the culture here, either you like it or not. A little bit of this culture would lead into your culture. You cannot stay 100%. So I would say maybe 80% still like, the original Nigerian Yoruba culture that I grew up with.
Okay.
Yeah.
And kind of talking about how, you have this blend of cultures, right? You absorb a little bit of the host country culture and all that kind of stuff. Like, how has that changed your worldview, right? How has the immigration process, and when I mean the process, I don't just mean coming over here, but being here for such a period of time, changed your worldview from what it was before you even immigrated at all?
Before coming here, this was the perfect society, right? But you learn that, yes, it is better than where I came from, but, we have our struggles over here as well. Someone may look at it and say, yeah, that's first world problems, but there still are problems, right? Either it's first world or not, still are problems. So there are challenges as well. I just know now that, there's nothing like a perfect society. We all have our blemish, one way or the other. And there's something we're working to improve, to better. And we just have to keep working at it. Hope the people in Nigeria continue to work at making Nigeria a place or a country that works. And over here, we have to continue to make sure it works and, continue to do what it takes to make sure the society.
That's a really good point. Mm-hmm. So, all right, so you were just talking about Nigeria and how you hope the people there are kind of working together to make sure that it's a country that works, right? Let me ask you this question, and I'm going to make it a little bit more generic. So this is for you as well as your family, your knowledge of what your family has done, I should say. How have you tried to contribute to the development of your home country, in this case, Nigeria? And if you have, or if they have, what challenges have you faced or you've experienced, you are aware of them facing? And what do you think is the primary challenge or obstacle of Nigeria in this case?
So, my dad has tried to start a few businesses back home, and it just does not work. And the reason is because you have people who are just trying to undermine your business. And these are the people you typically trust, right? And people you trust to run that business for you, right? If you're not going to move to Nigeria to go run that business yourself, and even if you do, it is difficult to run a business in Nigeria. Just to get a business registered in Nigeria, it's a hassle. It's not streamlined. It's not an easy process. It takes forever. It probably will be expensive. So just things like that. There was a scenario where my dad had imported something from China. Not China, from India, to be sold in Nigeria. And the person in charge told my dad, hold on, don't sell just yet, right? The price is appreciated, okay? My dad was like, no, just sell it. The profit is healthy. We don't need to make a killing. Sell it and let's move on. He said, no. We gotta wait, blah, blah, blah. He didn't listen, okay? And then later on, my dad was like, yo, it's taking too long. Sell this thing. I told you to sell this a month ago. And he said, okay. We'll sell it. And then he says, I found a buyer. They're coming to test it. And he said, oh, they came to test it. They said it was fake. See, so...
Did they actually come test it and they thought it was fake, or did there something else happen?
I believe something else happened. Okay. The product was tested initially when it was cleared from the port, right? So the question is, why didn't you sell initially when you were told to sell?
Yeah, it's not your product. Right. The person that wants to sell it, and you.
Right. The second question is, did you actually sell at that time and just took the money for yourself?
And pocketed it, yeah.
You're right, and kept the money. And the third thing was like, what happened to the fake product?
Hey, you said it's fake. Where is it? Where is it?
Yeah, and this is supposed to be like a trusted partner. Okay. Right. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges we face. It's just that the process of you doing business is not streamlined. It is not easy. It is not transparent, and you can't really trust people to execute for you. So if you're not there yourself, it is difficult to do it. So that's how we've tried to improve or at least contribute to the Nigerian economy. And you and I were talking a week ago about a project I'm still planning to do in Nigeria, all right? And we talked about all the possible challenges, because we know it's crazy trying to do it. But I'm still exploring how to do it and how to get it done successfully. But it's very challenging, to say the least, to start a company in Nigeria or try to contribute economically to Nigeria outside of you just sending money to Nigeria. Because sending money to Nigeria is contributing to the economy also. But that's not what you want to do, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, you're kind of ratting me out a little bit, right? So one of the goals of this podcast is to use it as a vehicle for benefiting Africa, right, in some form or shape, which is kind of ironic, because I'm going to wrap myself out to the audience. When you told me about this idea, I told you, I said, do not do it. Do not do it. I told you all the challenges, but I said, do not do it.
And the discouraging part of it is we know that this is something that is needed, right? Yeah. But the fear of we know the negatives, because we've lived it, we've seen it multiple times over and over again. So we know the product is needed, but at the same time, it's you know that the chances of you successfully completing that project without being swindled out of money or aging yourself ridiculously is very slim. So,
I don't know. I mean, you let me know if you think otherwise. But out of the community that we had in Bridgeport when we were growing up, a lot of people tried a lot of different things to invest in the Nigerian economy. Yeah. I don't know of one that was successful.
So I know of a semi-success story. The project got done, okay, more expensive than it should have been, right? But at least it got done. It got completed.
Well, when I say successful, I mean successful, not that the project got completed. If it's a project that's supposed to make money, did it make money or not?
Well, I mean, I hope it's profitable now. But it was more expensive than it should have been. But at least it got done.
Okay. Let me change directions a little bit, right? So one of the things that's happening is because of the situation of things, a lot of people are emigrating or trying to emigrate from Africa to different places around the world for better opportunities for different reasons. Some of them is because of education, some of them is because of employment and other things. I guess, what would be your advice that you would give to somebody who is considering emigrating from Africa? That's number one. It could be to the US, it could be to someplace else, although I think your advice is going to be more towards the US, since that's the system that you're familiar with. So what would be, I want you to kind of look at it in two folds. For the person that's thinking about it, that hasn't really made that move yet, or is maybe just working on the background and trying to make that happen, what's the advice you will have for them? And then for the person that just recently came, right? So they've already made it across the ocean, and they're actually here now, but they're still in their month 1 to 3, or maybe 4-6 months. What advice would you have for that individual as well?
I'm going to start with the person in Nigeria or in Africa. there's something called brain drain, right? And we know that the Western countries are taking like the professionals, like, the bright minds and all that, right?
And nurses here primarily.
Yeah. In the case of Nigeria, I read a couple of months ago where like the Nigerian government was telling UK to stop recruiting from Nigeria. And my answer to that is go to hell. If you're in Nigeria, you want to leave, leave. And, I'm sorry, but the same person saying like, don't recruit them, they are still taking the funds out of the system instead of putting the funds in the system, right? They're not building better hospitals. They're not, improving your wage. They're not improving your living situation. All they care about is like taking the money and like, storing it in like Switzerland or some other country that does not care about like, where the money is coming from, right? So if you have the opportunity to leave, leave. I am not one of those that would say, no, stay there. I am not there. Like, I don't have the right to tell you to stay there. If you need to leave, leave. What I would say is if you're going to come here or go to England or Canada, try your best to get in a legal way, right? So do not be an illegal immigrant. Be legal, okay? That's what I would say. A lot of people think it is easy to get papers when you're here illegally, but I have seen a lot of people suffer, okay? So try your best to come here with whatever documents you need to be a legal citizen. That would be like the biggest advice that I would give.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about to the person that's already here?
Well, if you're already here, be strategic, okay? Not every dollar is equal. Like, there's a dollar bill that will keep you getting that same dollar bill for the next 10 years. And, there are other avenues to make money where like you can still progress and like, get to your goal. So just be strategic, be smart about what you're doing, know what your goal is, continue to work towards it, hustle, do whatever you got to do, nothing illegal, but, hustle, do your thing, but keep your end goal in mind.
So when you say be strategic, what I think of is based on what you told me so far is like, hey, rather than going to do that security job, go for that medical billing and coding kind of job, kind of thing. Yeah. And in some cases, I think maybe if you just came into the country, you may not know enough to be aware of that. And hopefully, if people are in that kind of situations where you're considering things, I wouldn't consider myself an expert on any of these issues, but we are going to have like a website with an email where you can send in questions, and we can then use our community of immigrants to kind of get you answers that will help you be a little bit more strategic as you're considering some of the choices that you make, because that's really what this platform is all about. Like, how do we help people get stable as quickly as possible so that they can actually begin to enjoy some of the fruits of their labor rather than just spiraling.
And one more thing is choose your friends wisely. Okay.
Explain that one. What do you mean by choose your friends wisely?
Right. So I feel like we were very lucky that we found like our group of friends. And also, it was not just luck. There's a particular friend, I don't know if you met him or if you were around him. He came around the same time that, that I came in. So, but all he wanted to do was just smoke weed and, hang out and, girls, weed, parties, right? Mm. And gradually, we all just kind of like, we're like, hey, bro, what are you doing? Talk to him a little bit. And then when we felt like, he was just going to do his own thing and do that, we were just kind of like, excluded him from the group. And if you look at our group, everybody is done doing their own thing successfully, their own rights, right? So you have to make sure you're around people with similar goals. or people pursuing higher status than what they are, where they are at the moment. Or else you will find yourself not meeting your goals because you will more than likely, even if you are doing better than them, you're more than likely going to average out to where they are at. So choose your friends wisely in that scenario or in that case.
That's a really good point that you just brought up, and it kind of dives into a different question that I would like to ask, which was like support systems. I think one of the things that I look at in our story is that we all met, but we primarily met through like the Redeemed Christian Church in Bridgeport at the time, right? And I know I had issues with that particular church. But we also know that I have issues with religion in general, so that's a different story. I think a lot of us, I'm not sure, I may be saying things that are not necessarily true, in the sense that yes, that place was a place where we met. We all may have had issues, some kind of issue with the church in general, but at the same time, we all probably wouldn't have met if that church didn't exist.
Correct.
When you're looking into support systems in general, it's a blessing that Redeem, I think, is doing what they're doing around the world, because it's a good starting point to kind of start developing a support system. Yes, there are challenges. Nothing is perfect, but it's a good starting point to kind of find people that are a little bit like-minded, and then be able to kind of create your own network from there.
And that's absolutely true. I met at least like 50 to 60% of like friends from Redeem. I met the others from school or just from other Nigerian families in Connecticut. So it was a good starting point. At least you knew that on Sunday, I'm going to go hang out with some Nigerians. Our struggles are very similar. So we're able to help each other or assist each other or guide each other. And often, if there was a problem or you needed something, you could always reach out to someone, or someone was always willing to, help. All right. So it was definitely a blessing to have that.
All right. So we are now pretty much at the end of the podcast. I have 3 more questions to ask you. These are meant to be quick fire questions. All right.
Okay.
So don't worry about giving me lengthy answers.
All right.
First question is, what are some of the things you are most hopeful for in your home country, right? The country you came from, and in your current country? Go.
Home country, I am hopeful that we'll get our acts together and just provide the basic amenities. And let's just start with that. Let's provide security. Let's provide electricity. Let's provide water, good roads. Let's just start with that.
Okay.
And current country, I'm hopeful that we'll get past politics and relate to each other as just humans who we all have the same goal in mind, which is to progress the country and make the country better than it is currently. We may have different ideas of how to get there, but if we just come together and know that, we have the same goals, maybe we can work together and not just be Republican or Democrats and just hate each other.
I see your point. All right. Second question. What are some of the things you are most worried about in your home country and in your current country?
Home country, my biggest problem is security. Just knowing that I can go home and a police officer can rob me and kill me is frightening. That is my biggest concern. And that's one of the reasons I haven't gone home, really. Apart from the fact that I couldn't really afford it when I was in medical school, I just felt like it wasn't safe, and I did not really have an incentive to go. My parents are here, my siblings are here, what am I going to do, right? So that is that. Here, I don't know that I'm as frightened.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
And the last question is, what are some of the things you are most grateful for in your home country and in your current country?
Grateful for my upbringing. I absolutely feel like I can walk into any situation and find my way out. It wasn't pleasant back then, but I think it left me with the skills to navigate different situations. What was the second part of it?
What about in your current country? What are you most grateful for?
I'm just grateful for the opportunities. I can go to school, graduate, have a job, and look after my family, and have a little money left over to play with.
Good to know. This is going to be my last question. I'm not going to keep going. As a medical doctor, right, there are certain things about healthcare that immigrants don't necessarily know, right? But one of the things that almost everybody's going to have is a doctor. You're going to have a doctor, whether it's for your physical or whether it's for certain things. So this will have to be a different conversation, or it could be a conversation now about what should I know as an immigrant when I'm interfaced with healthcare in the U.S., specifically my own personal health, right? When I go see a doctor, what should I be aware of? How do I make sure that I am an informed immigrant rather than just an uninformed immigrant?
What I would say is find a doctor you can identify with. Every physician is well trained. Every physician has gone through residency and they're qualified to do their jobs. However, some are able to relate to you more than others, right? If I see myself in you, most of the time, I am able to give you better advice. I'm able to give you better counsel. So that's number one. The number two is do not neglect like the preventative side of things, right? We have a culture of I only go to the clinic or I only go to the doctors when I'm sick. Do not neglect like the preventative side of things. I can speak from personal experience in my family. If we did not do preventative screenings, we wouldn't have cut some things that like could have been, deadly, right? So I strongly advocate for getting your colonoscopies, getting your mammograms, getting your pap smears, all those kind of things. You got to make sure you're doing them.
When you said preventative too, that also includes like the physical, right?
Correct. Okay. And the physical is where like they talk about all of these things. Yep.
Okay. All right. So I go into the physical and they always they do take my blood pressure and the person tells me some numbers, 80 over 120 or whatever the numbers are. I don't really know what they are. And I just look at this person like, what the heck does that mean, right? Are there any, is there a book or a resource that you would say somebody should go check out just to learn a little bit more so that when we're having some of these conversations with our doctors, especially when it comes to like tests, lab tests or blood pressure tests or whatever tests they're doing, that we know just more than one layer of question of saying, is it good, right? We can ask more intelligent questions. Any recommendations to that area?
So there's a website called UpToDate. Physicians use it, but they also have like a patient aspect of things where they give you like basic education on things.
Okay.
So that's a resource I tell people to use often. You can also use like the Mayo Clinic. They always have like an explanation on a lot of like the basic things, even some complicated ones. So use UpToDate, use the Mayo Clinic. Medscape sometimes will have some good things, some good resources for you. UpToDate, I like UpToDate.
So I don't really have an audience yet. Normally, in some podcasts, they'll say, okay, this will give you some time to talk to the audience and say, let them know what you're doing. I don't have an audience. This is an audience of 0 or 1 right now. When I have 1,000, I will invite you back so we can actually say that. But is there anything that you would like to close out with before we finally end the podcast?
No, thank you for having me. It's been a fun conversation. I feel like we went back in time and, I would say this, like you were the first friend I made, like in Connecticut. You say you didn't remember earlier, but we spoke over the phone when I was in Boston before I came to Connecticut. And your house was like the place to like come to after school sometimes and like just hang out for a little bit. When Akai was there, yeah, I haven't talked to him in a long time. Yeah, so I am very, very grateful for like the group of friends we have. In some aspects, we've kept each other up to task. We have seen each other through some good times and some rough times. And, I'm happy and I'm very proud to see where everybody is, to see what we're all doing individually. Yeah, I'm blessed to have like the group that I have. And thank you for bringing me on. All the best with the podcast. You have some quality conversations, and I'm sure a lot of people would like to listen.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Really appreciate that. And it's a good point that you brought that up. I think at some point, maybe episode 50 or 100 of the podcast, if I am consistent, we'll bring the gang together and just throw out some topics and talk about some of the stuff.
Yes, that would be fun.
That would be pretty fun. All right, brother. I think we're done with the podcast. To the audience, when the website is up and the emails are up, I will let you guys know. But right now they are not. We're still working on getting that whole logistics things done. And Thank you guys, and I hope you guys have an excellent rest of the day.
I'm writing you this letter and letting you know that my brother, he go better, even better. I'm writing you this letter and letting you know that my sister, he go better, even better. Said it's gonna get better, my brother. He go better, oh yeah, even better. Oh, it's gonna get better, my sister.